These are hard words and difficult to understand. May the understanding that you placed in my heart be the words that you would have me bring to these, your people. No question. This is hard stuff. And it makes us want to kind of hide away from it. It brings to mind an engineering meeting that I had when I was working in Stanton. I'd just gotten there. Hadn't been in that position very long, didn't know many of the people. And about a week or 2 or 3 after I arrived, the engineering manager called a meeting. And he announced that there were layoffs and transfers coming that would affect the lives and the livelihoods of many of those of us who worked in the engineering department. It was a stressful time, and these meetings were never pleasant. Oftentimes, those who lost their job had no opportunity to correct the work that had caused the difficulties. Many times each of us have to decide what's important. Am I willing to do something unusual in order to get to a better place? And does this action require me to compromise any of my relationships before I reach the end goal? Those are the really tough decisions that are life-changing and require much thought on our part. So, how does all of this relate to our reading in Jeremiah? Jeremiah's this morning is about relationships, about the relationship between the Lord and his people. The relationship has been severed by the people's unfaithfulness. And it's not clear from this reading who the real speaker is. It could be Jeremiah crying out to the Lord for redemption, or it could be the Lord crying out to the people, asking them to come back to him. In either case, the verses are a prayer of lament, because the relationship is broken and they don't know how to restore it. The speaker looks for an opening to restoration in verse 22 when he asks, "Is there no balm in Gilead? Is there no physician there? Why then has the health of my poor people not been restored?" Broken relationships, both in Jeremiah's time and today, cause grief and sadness, both for the Lord, who misses the love of his people, and for the people who miss the love and protection of their God. So while our New Testament reading does not appear to be about relationships, I believe that it is. Jesus offers a parable to his disciples. This is the second of 3 rich man parables in Luke's Gospel. Luke 12, verses 16 through 21, is the parable of the rich fool. We talked about that several weeks ago. The rich fool tears down his barns to store his large harvest. And Jesus calls him a fool in the parable for such lack of foresight. In the next rich man parable we will talk about in a couple of weeks, or maybe next week, I believe. And Luke 16, 19 through 31 is a parable about a rich man and Lazarus as they enter the next life in Luke next week. Although the rich man is mentioned first, the parable this morning is primarily about the manager, who has been reported to his owner as squandering his master's property. Now, the manager doesn't offer any defense to his master's charges, so it seems that his guilt is never in doubt. The manager asks himself a typical Lucan question: what will I do? Just as the rich fool did back in Luke 12:13-21. Now, the rich fool answered badly in that parable. But in this parable, Jesus says the manager acted shrewdly when he treats money as if it has no intrinsic value and negotiates a beneficial solution for the two debtors to immediately help himself in the future. Jesus urges his followers to use their money in the same way, in the present to help others, and in the future to help oneself. The manager's dishonesty got him into trouble with the owner, but in his shrewdness, he is able to relieve that problem, though it doesn't appear that he saved his job. His shrewdness is the central part of the parable. I would suggest that the parable is really not about money or the lack of it. The parable should be about taking responsibility for relationships. Everyone in this parable has a relationship with the other people. The debtors have a relationship with their manager, which was broken down when they couldn't pay their bill. How those responsibilities will be cared for. Now we come to the tough part. In verse 10, Jesus says, whoever is faithful in little is faithful also in much. And whoever is dishonest in little is also dishonest in much. The little thing in this parable is being faithful to our relationships with each other and the manager and the vendors, who should have been working hard to avoid the damaging debts that caused their relationship to sour with the owner. Jesus' most important part of his ministry was to show people how to live in right relationship with God and with each other. In reply to a question from a Pharisee, Jesus said, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and all your soul and all your mind. This is the greatest and the first commandment. And the second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. On these two commandments hang all the prophets and the laws. Jesus didn't say it, but he's talking about relationships, about loving God and neighbor before we care for ourselves. In the parable of the dishonest manager, Jesus tells his disciples that being faithful in big things, loving God, means they will also be faithful in the little things, loving each other. He is encouraging individuals to take responsibility for their relationships with God first, the big thing, and relationships with each other, the smaller thing, second. We're picking up the tab when we take responsibility to live our lives the way Jesus taught. Sure, there'll still be people whose circumstances are unfortunate, but their lives will be better if all of us make an effort to know and care about those conditions that are making their lives difficult. Our faith community will be stronger when each of us takes responsibility for building strong relationships among our community. And Christianity as a whole will be that shining example that Jesus expects for the world when we put God first, our neighbors next, and keep ourselves in right relationship with God and the rest of the world. Now,